truths for what it means to know God, what it means to be led by Him. And we ask the Lord to prepare us to really understand and celebrate the death and the resurrection of our Lord Jesus. We're familiar with the symbol, the cross. We're familiar perhaps with the basic storyline, but what does it really mean, and how does it touch our lives? So what we're going to do this month is we're going to offer you the chance to be part of a small group. There are sign-ups as you go out into the lobby on the left-hand side. Before you go to breakfast, you can sign up for your spiritual food for the month. And the groups are being offered and given a set of class notes or study notes that will take what we do on Sunday morning, you might say, to the next level, both in terms of some more understanding that we can't get to here about the topic at hand, and also a chance for you to interact and share. And the most important thing will be that you make some friends and that you get to talk and to listen, and things that we can't do here on a Sunday morning. If you can't make it to all of the group meetings, I would encourage you to be involved as much as you can. And if you miss a Sunday, all the material, the PowerPoint, as well as the sermon notes, as well as the sermon itself, are always posted online. So I would encourage you to keep up with what we're doing. And we're going to find that the Lord's going to be doing some really neat things in our lives, in all of our lives, starting right here at the pulpit, as we spend time in some of the most precious words that Jesus ever gave to us. On August the 2nd, 1967, a young violinist named David Margetts borrowed a violin for a rehearsal with the UCLA string quartet. He carried the violin in its case out to his car, drove to his destination, but when he got there, he discovered to his horror the violin was missing. It might have been stolen. As he tried to retrace his steps, he had gone to the grocery store, and maybe someone had broken into the car, he didn't know, or he had to admit that he might just have done with it what you might have done with a cup of coffee that you bought at the Quick Stop, and then you put on top of the car while you looked for your keys, and then you got in your car, and then you noticed that you had funny brown liquid all over your back windshield. In any event, the violin was gone. Now, the violin was a gift to the university from a very wealthy person. It was no ordinary instrument. In fact, it was a Stradivarius. It had its own name, the Duke of Alcantara. It was worth $800,000, if you wanted to give it a monetary value. Of course, from another angle, it was priceless, because money could never buy a Stradivarius. It was 262 years old, and or thereabouts. It had been crafted in 1737. And now the Duke of Alcantara was gone. And that would have been the end of a very sad story, except for the fact that a woman happened to be driving down the freeway and found a violin case lying on the ground at the side of the road. So she stopped, picked up the case, put it in her car, and took it home. There were no notes associated with it. No, please return me to UCLA, I'm very valuable. It was just actually a double violin case with 2 violins in it. Now, the woman eventually gave the violin to her nephew over the course of time, and he in turn gave it to his ex-wife as part of a divorce settlement. The new owner, Ms. Teresa Salvato, was an amateur violinist. Thus, she received the violin when the divorce went through. And one day, 27 years after David Margetts lost the Duke of Alcantara, her violin teacher took this seemingly nondescript violin into a shop for some repairs. The moment the owner of the violin shop saw the violin, he knew that he was looking at far more than the typical student violin. If you know anything about instruments, that lighted shape is called the F-hole of the violin. You know how on both sides of the strings it has that opening to let the sound out. And if you really know what you're doing and you want to know about where a violin comes from, there's a good chance if you look in there with a light, you will find that the maker of the violin has left some sort of indication. In this case, it says Antonius Stradivarius, Cremonensis, that was the name of the town. And in this particular case, we're looking at a Stradivarius, not the Duke of Alcantara, but another one that was built in 1722. So the violin shop owner looked into this violin, checked it out, and realized he was looking at something very, very special. In fact, it did not take him long to realize he was looking at a genuine 262-year-old Stradivarius by the name of the Duke of Alcantara. Isn't it funny how a violin can sit in the closet, or for that matter, under the bed, for 27 years, to be taken out occasionally and played, perhaps used as a student violin by an amateur violinist who goes off to her lesson every week or whatever, and the teacher sees the instrument but sees it in the context of a student and hears it being played the way a student would play it. And all this would go along with no one having a clue as to what that instrument actually was. This violin, then once someone sees it, who is able to identify its true worth, is discovered to be priceless, irreplaceable, and is suddenly found, even though technically, at least for some, in one sense, it was never totally lost. Now, two things conspired to cause people to think of this priceless instrument as just another nondescript student violin for 27 years. Number one, it was lost by those who knew its worth. There were people around who searched for that violin. There were people around who valued it. There certainly were insurance adjusters, I'm sure, who had to pay out after some point in time and were thinking, boy, if we could find that thing, we could save the company some money. There were musicians who were lamenting the loss of this beautiful instrument. There were students at UCLA who were saying, I'll never get to play it. It was not that nobody cared, but as far as they were concerned, this precious instrument had been lost. And secondly, it had been found by someone who had no idea of its worth, and who therefore attached her own sense of meaning and value to it. She took care of it, but it had come easy. It had just been found by the side of the road. What does that tell you? I mean, how many people would leave a 262-year-old, $800,000 violin just sitting on the side of the I-5 outside of LA or somewhere? It wasn't going to happen. There's no logical way any sane, rational person would think that something they found by the side of the road in an old beat-up case, something that looked really old because it was really old, had any greater value than whatever they would assign to it. Now, the Duke of Alcantara never ceased to be a Stradivarius violin. It continued to play as only an instrument of that quality could play. It always made the uniquely beautiful music that only a Stradivarius could make. An interesting little quote from the woman who was the last owner before it was returned to UCLA, Ms. Salvato. She said this, quote, "There are things I can't do on the violin, but I can execute them on that violin." It's as if the violin was trying to tell her its true identity all those years. But she could never have imagined just how wonderful and how valuable it was when she tucked it under her chin or worked through her violin lesson or took it to play before her teacher. But when an expert on violins and their history saw that violin, everything changed. The lost violin was found. The ordinary violin became extraordinary once again. And now, returned to the university, it once more does what it was meant to do. It makes the music that only a Stradivarius can make. Now, in many ways, the story of this violin, the Duke of Alcantara, the violin that was lost by the side of the road and once found when it was taken into a shop, in many ways, the story of this violin is the story of one of the most familiar parts of the Bible, the Lord's Prayer. If you read the Lord's Prayer in the original Greek language, it comes out to 57 words, not counting the traditional ending. If you go into your NIV Bible, 53 words, just about the same. How many millions and millions of people have prayed those words in whatever language was their mother tongue? All over the world, for the last 2,000 years. In some traditions, you cannot have church unless we have all said the Lord's Prayer or the Our Father. You cannot really consider the marriage or the funeral to have been a complete a complete ceremony without those words. For some people, you cannot even get up in the morning and consider that you've had your prayer time until you've said those words. I've seen those words inscribed, believe it or not, on a grain of rice that you need a magnifying glass to look at. Or they've been in lockets, or they've been on bookmarks, or they've been on plaques and discussed and talked about for thousands of years. How special is this little prayer? Well, in Matthew, Jesus prefaces the prayer itself with these words. Let me read to you how Jesus starts us out in Matthew chapter 6, verse 9. This, then, is how you should pray. This is how you talk to God. This is how you go about the business of taking that journey out of yourself and into what God meant for you to be. Out of a world that dehumanizes you and into God's new reality. These are the words for that journey. And of course, what follows in just a few verses, those 57 words or 53 words, if you will, is the one prayer that Jesus gave us. The one set of words that we're to speak to God as we follow Jesus. He evidently believed that this one prayer was enough. Not that we can't pray in many ways. We can pray other parts of the Bible. We can pray the Psalms, or we can pray the prayers of Paul and so on. Not that we can't pray on our own and make up our own prayer to God. But as a model, as a backup, as a background, as a foundation, Jesus said, here's all you need. I believe he was saying, if you would unpack this prayer, you'll find within it a way to connect with every aspect of your life journey of following Jesus. Like a priceless Stradivarius, this prayer sings the music of heaven, if we have ears to hear it. But this is where the example of the Duke of Alcantara comes in for me. Is it possible that the Lord's Prayer has sometimes gotten lost or perhaps been drastically undervalued? Is it possible that we've sort of found it maybe out of context, like a beautiful violin by the side of the road, and we pick it up and we use it to the best of our ability, but we end up assigning our meaning to it, and we sort of make it work the way we think it's supposed to work instead of understanding what it really is. Some religious traditions have so ritualized the use of a prayer like the Lord's Prayer that it's become almost an afterthought, something to be recited at a particular time as part of a particular rite. Doesn't matter even whether you think about or understand how much the prayer relates to regular life. Once we start those words, our Father who art in heaven, we just slide right on through to the end. Of course, the most exciting thing about saying the Lord's Prayer is whether you say the ending or not. To thine be the power, the kingdom and the power and the glory forever and ever. For many, many generations, Protestants and Catholics separated on those last words. And you could always tell whether the people that were saying the prayer were part of your tribe or the other tribe by whether they said the end. Is that what the prayer was put there for? Jesus saying, I'm going to put an acid test of Catholic versus Protestant into the Bible 1,500 years before there is such a thing as Protestant versus... No, of course not. But it gives you an example of how something so precious could end up functioning in a way that it was never meant to function. Other traditions like our own, in our particular form of Protestantism, the Pentecostal tradition, has written the Lord's Prayer out of our services. When's the last time we said the Our Father here at church on a Sunday morning? Sure, it's in the Bible. It's even in red letters. But we do not want to be bound by ritual and liturgy. Could it be that the Lord's Prayer became something like a priceless violin left on top of the car, only to fall by the wayside? Our mission this Easter season is to recover and rediscover this beautiful prayer. And when we do, we will find that it hasn't lost any of its power to redefine us and to guide us on our journey as we follow Jesus. The Lord's Prayer gives us, in Jesus' own words, our words for the journey. So let's get started. We all know how the Lord's Prayer begins, or most of us do. First two words, say them with me. Our Father. There you go. We've got that. Some circles, frankly, and when I moved up here to Vermont and in a very strongly French Catholic environment, I discovered that it wasn't even called the Lord's Prayer. What's it called? The Our Father. The Our Father, because once you say Our Father, your brain just keeps right on going, especially if you've been to school or been to catechism or been to church where you say it every year, every week, every month, every day. First line of the prayer focuses our attention on God, on the God that Jesus knew and revealed to us. There are some important words that go along with Our Father. Look with me at verse 9, and that will be our text for this morning, Matthew 6:9. Our Father in heaven, hallowed be your name. Now, right now, we face a question. What is Jesus saying in this brief little opening statement that forms the beginning of this prayer? Are they just a way to get us started? Something reverent we can say, something complimentary to God, kind of get our brain in gear. It's like, oh yes, I need to say something holy to get this thing going. I'm going to be praying after all. Is Jesus providing us with a warm, fuzzy prayer that helps us see God in a non-threatening way? I think more and more now we talk about God as Father, sort of a way of saying, don't be afraid of Him. He loves you. He's love, and He's out there, and He cares, and you know, He's not the mean, threatening God that shoots fire bolts down from the sky, but He's your daddy. Third question. Just what does hallowed be your name really mean anyway? Did you ever say hallowed be anything? I mean, the only time we say hallow is on the 31st of October, and that really doesn't seem to fit the Lord's Prayer. Things lost, words that we interpret by what we know, or words that we gloss over because they're either too familiar or they sound funny to us. What's Jesus talking about anyway? To Jesus' Jewish audience, and of course Jesus was Jewish rabbi, lived in a Jewish country, spent his entire life with Jewish people. His disciples were all Jewish. Look at their names, of most of them at least. Certainly all of them were part of the Jewish community. To Jesus' Jewish audience, these two words, Our Father, would have been perfectly understandable, but perhaps in a way that we wouldn't think of. You see, the Jewish people had themselves come into being. They had become a nation because God had specifically declared that He was their Father. You go way back in the story of God's people to the place where the Israelites came into their being as a nation. We find ourselves in Egypt. Israel, Abraham's children, have been there for 400 years. They're living in Egypt. They don't know anything but Egypt. They now face a Pharaoh who wants to exterminate them, eliminate them as a nation. He has already passed laws that say that all the male children are to be killed. That means that within a generation or two, all of the female Hebrews would be married into Egyptian society, and like they must have done with any number of ethnic groups, this particular troublesome Hebrew group would cease to exist. And then God steps in and says, it will not be like that. I made a promise to their ancestor Abraham that out of his family would become a great nation. I will not let this nation be destroyed, even if they're living as slaves. God steps in and says, I'm going to lead my people on a journey out of the dehumanizing atmosphere of Egypt, with its slavery, its oppression, with all of the idolatry, with the threat of genocide of my people, everything that goes against what it means to be human. And I'm going to take them to their true humanity, where they become what I meant for them to be, my reflection into this world, from dehumanized to truly human. And so he chooses a man named Moses to lead the expedition. And in chapter 4, this is what he tells Moses to say to King Pharaoh. Exodus 4, 22, 23. Then say to Pharaoh, this is what the Lord says. Israel is my firstborn son. And I told you, let my son go, so he may worship me. So when Jewish people heard Jesus calling God Father, for them that had a very personal and real application. It wasn't just a warm, fuzzy idea about God, making God accessible to us. What it meant was that he was talking about the God who had adopted them, had taken them out of slavery, and had made them his own children, with all the privileges that would go with that. By calling the enslaved Israelites his son, God was giving them a brand new identity. Think about the identity that they had as slaves in Egypt. They were second class, they were aliens. They probably weren't considered citizens because they weren't Egyptian. They were always seen as a threat that perhaps they would side with some other group and rebel against the true Egyptians. So they faced a form of racism that never went away. Pharaoh, in fact, decided to exterminate them because they were of a different race. They faced all the temptations to just give in and go Egyptian, if you will, give up their identity and become something else, or allow their children to become something else. And the whole situation was one in which an ungodly king was determining what it means to be human according to what he wanted and what he could get, instead of the creator of heavens and earth, God himself, bringing people into their true purpose for what we were put here for. But God steps in and says, say to Pharaoh, Israel is my firstborn son. God defines this unwanted and despised group of people as his most precious possession, his family. So when Jesus says, start your prayer this way, our Father, he's challenging you and he's challenging me to dare to believe that the one who created us is giving us a brand new identity, one this world would never give to us. One that says, you're my family, you're my children, and I'm going to make you into what you were meant to be. I don't know what kind of identity you carry around. I don't know what your background is. I know some of you, we have conversations. Some of us have sat and talked and prayed about really hard things. Others, maybe we haven't done that yet. Perhaps in your small group, you'll have a chance to talk about that a little bit. But not one of us comes into this life or gets to adulthood with an intact identity, the identity that God would have for us. Nobody gets there. The world is, frankly, too much of a mess. There are too many people who want to take something from us or have us be part of what they're doing. There are too many urges within us to defend ourselves or perhaps to expand our influence over others, that we cop out of God's identity, and we basically come to believe in false identities. We may not be slaves in Egypt. We may not be facing extermination from an evil and cruel king, as the Jewish people did under Hitler, or as the Hebrew people did under Pharaoh. But nonetheless, when Jesus says, say these words, our Father, he is daring you to believe that God has a different identity for you, one in which you are his daughter or his son. And a new identity means a new journey. You can't assume a new identity and go on living the way you did before. I can remember a very painful learning experience from the first month or so of my marriage to Suzanne. It was 40 years ago, and it was as painful right now when I think about it as it was when I messed up at that particular time. A fine autumn day, been married a month. Sue was at work. I was in between classes at the University of New Hampshire. And so it was such a beautiful day, I just hopped in the car and went for a ride. I believe I went down from Durham down to the ocean, just kind of hanging out. 4 hours. Somewhere during that 4 hours, Suzanne started wondering where I was. Now, mind you, this is 1973. This was science fiction at that point in time. I came back after 4 hours or so, walked into the building where she worked, and no one would make eye contact with me. I mean, the hostility was palpable. Hi. Hi. I'm going, ooh. When I got to Suzanne's room where she worked, it wasn't hostility. It was just shock and hurt and pain. I mean, the state police were already looking for me. I'd already died 3 times the side of the road. But the real hurt was, why? Why didn't you let me know? Why go through this kind of pain? You know what had gone wrong? I'd forgotten I was married. It had only been a month. I was a grad student with nothing to do. I was in between classes. It was a nice day. I just went and did what I had always done. Nothing bad or evil. I didn't run off with somebody. I just sort of went back to being footloose and fancy-free. Not a good move. You see, I had a new identity. And a new identity required a new way of doing life. And I've tried to work on that over the last 40 years. When we say the words, "Our Father," we not only agree to a new identity, we also agree to a new journey. When you begin this prayer, folks, and you say, "Our Father," you are saying, "I accept that you've made me your child and that you are starting me on my own exodus out of my broken identity, out of my broken world that will pull me back into that way of living and thinking and out into something I don't even understand, something I can't even imagine that only you can see." You see, when God speaks to Moses, he not only says, "Israel's my firstborn son," but in verse 23, he says, "Let my son go so he may worship me." God's announcing the beginning of a journey that the Bible calls the Exodus. So in a sense, these two little words, "Our Father," are some of the most dangerous words you can ever say. They're a big deal because they commit you to accepting this new identity and renouncing your old one. Every time you call God Father, if you let the music come out of the violin the way it was meant to come, and you understand the power of these words, Jesus wasn't just giving you a little quick way to get started in prayer. He was drilling down to the very bedrock of who you are. Will you call him Father today? That means letting go of your old self and understanding you're going to be a reflection of him as his child. Are you going to call God Father today? That means that today is part of a whole different journey. Not one you chose, not one you understand. A journey that goes where you don't even know how it can even go to those places. So how will we know this Father? Because now it becomes very important that I know who he is. If he's going to mess up my whole world and take me to a whole different world, who is this God? Well, Moses asked that question of God in Exodus 3, verses 13 through 15. Listen to this conversation. Moses said to God, "Suppose I go to the Israelites and say to them, 'The God of your fathers has sent me to you,' and they ask me, 'What is his name?'" And then Moses says, "I don't have a clue. I had a spiritual experience out in the desert. I saw a bush. I heard a voice. But frankly, you're telling me to do a whole lot of stuff, and I don't know who you are." God said to Moses, "I am who I am." This is what you are to say to the Israelites. "I am has sent me to you." God also said to Moses, "Say to the Israelites, 'The Lord, the God of your fathers, the God of Abraham, of Isaac, and Jacob, has sent me to you. This is my name forever, the name you shall call me from generation to generation." You see, that journey could only begin when God revealed who he was, when he gave Moses and his people his name. And his name says it all. It wasn't just a name like the names of the other Egyptian gods, the god of the sun, or the god of the Nile, or the god of this part of life or that part of life. He says, "No, my name is reality. I am." That's it. That's all there is. I am that I am. You won't go any deeper than that. I'm the creator and I'm the sustainer of everything that exists. And God says, I'm the same person, the same God, who started this story by making a covenant with your ancestors. So you're only going to find that identity. You're only going to find that reality in following me, because I'm the God who created you. I've made that identity that made you to be that person. I've created you for that journey to bring you to wholeness. Our Father in heaven, hallowed be your name. Now I want to invite you to step out on this same journey that Jesus was challenging his disciples to take. This Exodus journey. This week, would you make the Lord's Prayer the central part of your prayer time. If you don't have a regular prayer time, set aside some time each day, preferably in the morning, to talk to God and to listen to God. And here are 3 little simple questions that you can ask to help you kind of focus on the beginning of the prayer. In a way, what we can do is learn this prayer as if we'd never heard it before. We can do a little bit each week. It'll just make for a longer experience of God's prayer, the Lord's Prayer, and it'll just get richer and deeper as you put all the pieces together. But starting with this first part, Our Father, who is in heaven, hallowed be your name. Here are 3 questions. Number 1, in what ways does accepting God as Father change how I see myself today? That's the identity question. You're going to get up in the morning, you can look at yourself, I don't want to go to work, or I can't believe, on and on and on. Or can you say, Father, it's not about how I see myself. What do you see in me today? That ought to keep you pretty busy. Second question, in what ways does my journey take me away from the old and into God's new life as I go through the day? Your day will face you with things that you didn't plan on. Your day will face you with things you didn't want. Hello? Does God have a plan that is bigger than what you're experiencing or what you're linking that to in terms of how you interpret the day? What if every single thing that happened in your day could fit into something bigger that God was doing? Well, you know what? When you say Our Father, you're signing on to a journey. And the third question is, in what ways is God, my Father, showing himself to me today? The God who is. The I am. It all begins with 2 simple words. Our Father. And when we say those words, we discover that they lead us into an amazing journey. Stand with me, if you will, and I've asked if Mark could bring up the traditional version of this prayer. Let's just stand, and as we're going to do each week, we're going to say this beautiful prayer together. There are many different ways you can learn it. My goal for you is, if it isn't part of your memory banks already, that it will be, and that we can celebrate this prayer on a regular basis, not maybe every week, but certainly often here, even as we're together. So whether you need to look at the words or you can close your eyes, let's just pray together. Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done, on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. Lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom, the power, and the glory, forever and ever. Amen. Thank you, Lord. Father, thank you. Begin that work now, Lord, of making Jesus' prayer our prayer. We give you thanks. Welcome our team to come up at this time, and let's sing together as we are dismissed. I want to thank you for being here this morning. I want to encourage you to sign up for a group if you haven't. There are sign-up sheets there. As we sing together, I'll ask if our prayer team would come down to pray with you if you have any special needs that would require his attention. So let's sing together.